The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
And hey there, folks. Welcome to today's edition of the Whitfield Report. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, recording here at Right to Offend Media Studios. Joining me today is author Matt Scott, who's written several books, such as The AYATOLLAH Takedown, The Iranian Deception, and Surviving the Lion's Den. I have started to read the first book, and it's pretty good so far. And I'm just super honored to have Matt on the podcast and to hear a little bit about his background. So, Matt, welcome to the Whitfield Report. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, Sam. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
No problem. So, just to kind of start off, what is your general background, and how did you get started with writing?
It was a very windy road to get here, I can tell you that. Just simply because, if I'm being honest with everybody, I hated reading when I was younger. I absolutely hated it, just because the summer reading that they gave us in high school and college and things like that, it just just weren't very interesting to me. So then the Da Vinci Code came out, and that was such a phenomenon that you could not read it. But then I was on an elevator one day with a guy who I've never seen before, never seen again. We were just kind of talking about spy novels, and we got talking about Vince Flynn. So I went in and started reading Vince Flynn novels, and as you read a novel by Vince Flynn, Brad Thor, Mark Graney, Joel Rosenberg, you're also taking a master class in plot and character development. And it kind of just started developing some ideas as to whether or not, I could write a novel, and, what it would look like if I did. Then self-doubt, the thing that, plagues all of us kind of creeps in. I went to a book signing for David Baldacci in November of I want to say it was 2018, I think. And, I was getting ready to be 40 at the time. The next year, and I asked him, I was like, "He's 40 years old, too old to write your first novel?" And I kid you not, he stopped mid-signature, looked up at me, and said, "Hell no, the industry can use some good young writers." Now, I didn't know if I should be happier that he thought 40 was young, or that he was telling me to go forth with my mythic destiny. But I started my first draft of Surviving the Lion's Den probably a month after I got home from that meeting, or from that book signing. So that was the road that put me on, to become a writer.
Fascinating. And I mean, it's interesting that you bring up Vince Flynn, because you and I almost have the exact same kind of, I guess, path in regards to becoming authors, because like you, I never liked any of the summer reading lists either in high school, and it it wasn't really until I was between high school and college, I had taken a gap year, and a friend of mine at the time, he knew that I was a big fan of the show 24, and he had just started reading Vince Flynn as well. He recommended that I pick up, and I started with not with American Assassin, but I it's the one it's technically like the first one that comes in the Mitch Rapp series, and I just went
Transfer of
from
power.
yeah,
Transfer
Transfer
of
of
power.
Power,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
I just kind of continued the series from there. And like you, I was kind of like, well, shoot, maybe I could write something.
Right.
I kind of started to work on my writing a bit, and then I started college, so I had to put it on hold for a couple of years. But then
Right.
once I graduated, I kind of picked it up, and then while I was in college, that was also when Jack Carr kind of
Yeah.
came onto the scene
Right.
as
Right.
well. So,
Yeah. 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 For me, I think the first Flynn novel. Matter of fact, the day I met that guy on the elevator, I went to the bookstore. And I think it was Act of Treason that was the first one for me. Which, looking back on it, I don't think was his best novel of the series, but it hooked me enough that I just I dove into it. And one of the things that happened for me, one of the, I guess, we'll call it a downstream effect of 9/11 was that you had so many. It created this golden age of spy novels, with to me, with Flynn leading the charge. And he kind of took the mantle from I guess you could say Clancy. And I
yeah,
think now the title belongs to Brad Thor. But it created a golden age of spy thrillers, so you could pick them up and read them, just about everywhere because they were just that hot. And then you had all of the nonfiction books that were coming out about, why 9/11 happened, what was, how did Al Qaeda get formed. And for me, it was just a plethora of knowledge out there to be learned. And I did go to college. When I went to college, the president of the college, General Sam Wilson, used to be the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So I kind of got, the spy bug kind of bit me early on, but it was a little bit of a little bit at a time, and it didn't bite me all at once. And it just, I was able to eventually use everything that I learned to create what was eventually put into Surviving the Lion's Den.
yeah. So that's interesting too because I was a kid when 9/11 happened, and that was, I guess you could say, that was like the first real world event that like I actually
Sure,
can kind of remember.
sure,
Even though
sure.
I was in like second grade at the time, that kind of sparked my interest in politics and current events and history, among other
Right.
things. And the fact I also
Yeah.
had both my grandfathers served in World War II. But suffice it to say, I kind of always had that spy bug, too.
Sure.
Also,
Yeah.
being a big Bond fan, and then I had tried to read some of the Tom Clancy books when I was in high school, but those things, some of those are like 800 pages,
Yeah,
long.
Clancy's tough.
Yeah,
I definitely think that, as great as his novels still are to this day, I don't think that they were meant for the younger reader. I think you had to either have some type of, military or, defense background to enjoy them if you were young. Once you had some, life experience or real world experience, I think they were more meant for, people, 35, 40 plus. But I mean, they still stand, the test of time. No doubt.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just it's hard. It was hard to read those, early on. I tend to think, Flynn and Thor and Graney and all those guys. I think now, the spy genre has changed enough that the publishers know what the readers are looking for, so they're able to gravitate towards a little bit of a younger audience. But by the time Clancy was out there, you had Jean le Carré before him and Robert Ludlum, and Clancy was, the next step in spy thriller evolution, if you call it. But they were all
yeah.
part of the same club in terms of, what the audience was looking for, what audience they were writing towards. Now it's considerably different.
I feel like Flynn, at least this is just kind of my perspective as a writer too, because like I've since gone back and reread some of the Tom Clancy books. Or I guess,
Hmm.
technically, like, I've listened to them on Audible since I have an Audible subscription. The one thing I've the one thing I've noticed about Vince's books, and I have all of them, is, I mean, he was really good at developing the character of Mitch Rapp and other,
Hmm.
characters like in his universe, whereas like Tom Clancy and others kind of his generation, and this isn't like a knock on him at all. They were very good at technical stuff and like the technical end of warfare, but like for a while it seemed as if Jack Ryan was kind of like a one, dimensional character in some aspects, comparative to Mitch Rapp or something
Yeah,
like
I
that.
don't think that's wrong. I don't think that's wrong. I mean, those, the Clancy days and Le Carre, and it was always very, you know, craft based and plot based. Flynn I mean, he freely admitted that, his novels had, a little bit of a recipe. You had, the hero, you had the terrorist, and you had, the secondary villain, which was, the politicians. And it was a recipe that worked over and over and over. But, the genius of his writing was that he made you hate the villains, and especially the politicians,
Yeah,
so bad that you were literally salivating for Mitch Rapp to come in there and just clean house. And it was almost, dare I say, orgasmic
yeah,
when it happened. I mean, you just couldn't wait to see what he was going to do about it. And I think that was his genius.
yeah. And I mean, I also remember going back and, later on reading, kind of like reviews of what people, were saying. Some of Vince's critics, and a lot of them, were saying, oh, he was too far right, or anything like that. Which, for me, I'm like, oh well, that just makes me like him, even more, so to speak. At least, for me
Yeah, I
personally.
mean,
But
I don't know. I think more of his fans were probably a little bit more lean to the right.
yeah,
I think he tried to leave that, out of his books as much as possible. But what he really wanted was, accountability.
right,
And, whether it was, the character was on the right side of the lane or the left side of the lane, he wanted to make sure that, his characters, Mitch Rapp especially, had a very strong moral compass. And, if you crossed him, or you were, crossing the country, he was going to make sure that, you regretted it. And I think that's a fair assessment. I do see where some of the critics will, you can argue whether or not it's well deserved or not, but I can definitely understand their point of view.
yeah. I
But
mean,
that was his audience. I mean, he made a lot of fans. He made a lot of money because that's the niche that he hit. Really hit a vital chord with people in America that kind of felt that way. Uh, and that was why he was so good at what he did.
well, and I mean, I don't think that he was like super, political in his books either. I just think that, and I've kind of noticed this. Even if he, like, for me personally, even as a writer, I try not to, at least in my books, politicize it too much.
Right.
Crit- Critics are going to be critical, and, you know, even if you leave politics out, people like to, imagine and self-insert things in there.
You can't please
So
everybody. You can't please everybody. You write to the audience that you think is gonna enjoy it the most. So yeah, you don't worry about it.
yeah,
But he did it well. I don't think he was very good at predicting future events. Although I think in Memorial Day, his book Memorial Day, the scene where the helicopter is coming in to grab one of the Al Qaeda suspects, it sounded eerily like what happened in with the Bin Laden raid. So I think that was probably the one thing that he was very good about predicting. But when it comes to predicting world events, I think two guys really hold that title, and it's Brad Thor and Joel Rosenberg. I don't think you're going to get it any better for foreshadowing what's going to happen than those two guys.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think Vince knew that wasn't, that foreshadowing wasn't his forte either. I don't think he ever tried to be that guy
No,
to an
no, no,
extent
no, no,
either.
no. I don't think he did. I don't think he did either. I think he looked at, you know, he looked at the world and he found a way to, design a plot that fit the world that we live in and a way to weave his characters into it. And for his time, he was the best.
Yeah. Um, and unfortunately, I mean, I like some of the guys who have taken over, the franchise since his passing, but I don't think that those books are as strong as, when he was writing them. Like, I think they've done a good job. It's not quite the same, at least in my.
No, and I don't think it's not fair for us to expect that. I think Kyle
No.
Mills did a pretty good job. I mean, there were some of the novels in his series, I liked more than others. It's still
Yeah.
too early to tell for Don Bentley, but I mean, because he's only had the one book out, but I have a lot of faith in Don Bentley. But I think
Yeah.
Kyle did, I think Mills did, a really good job. I like the way the Mitrap character, his life kind of evolved a little bit, especially, with the family and aspect of his life. But, no one was ever going to do it better than Vince. All you can do is just try and, fill the shoes as best you can.
Right.
I think they did it. I think Kyle did a pretty good job.
So with your book series, especially starting with the Ayatollah Takedown, so was your book then directly like inspired by the Vince, by kind of the Vince Flynn and Brad Thor? Like, was inspired you to write that specific story, or was it, I guess, was it current events, or what was it that drove you to choose Iran as a setting to play?
Well, I mean, so Surviving the Lion's Den is actually the first book in the series.
Yeah.
The Ayatollah Takedown is the third one, the conclusion. I drew inspiration from, a number of different authors, but, nobody can write like those guys. Every author has to have his own voice. I, read their novels, studied the way they did certain things, character development, plot and all those things. So, everybody has their own inspiration, but in the end, it's up to the author to, have their own voice. And for me personally, the reason that I chose Iran was because I was curious about it. It has been so shut off from the Western world, especially the US, that nobody really knows what it looks like on the inside. And that's one of the things that I think that Da Vinci Code did really well is that, Dan Brown took people on a tour of Europe, while he was, weaving his plot and his, coding and little mysteries, in there with Robert Langdon. So I wanted to know what, Iran looked like on the inside and, show the readers that. But, to me, it's also been a regime. When I say the regime, I mean the Ayatollahs and the supreme leader that
Right.
has been, I won't say ignored, but I really wanted to dive into it a little deeper. It's easy to make Iran, the villain in any novel, but I was more interested in the inner workings of their government and trying to see them, the way they think and, the impact of, the everyday, Iranian citizen who was, having to, buy their groceries on the black market or things like that. So it was important for me to study the inner workings of Iran, number one. But the other part was that, I when I decided I wanted to write a novel, that I wanted to make it about a kidnapped CIA agent. And I just thought that, the Iran angle was the best way to do that. But, as people will see when they read the novel, it's really a two-pronged story that comes together because I needed a character, and in this case, my protagonist, Kirk Carruthers, he is of Iranian descent. but he is a natural born, American citizen. And, his father was involved in the coup of Mohammad Mossadegh. And the Iranians had always been hunting for the people that participated in that coup. So, when his grandfather gets killed, he goes over to Iran to exact revenge. And, I won't spoil it for anybody, but, he ends up coming together with the Tom DeLange character, who is the kidnapped CIA agent, and it ends up being an escape plot to get out of Iran, and then you have the race against the clock to beat the political angle that I input with a character by the name of Senator Vivian Walsh.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, because I've started reading Into the Lion's Den, and yeah, when it's revealed that Kirk is of Iranian descent, I thought that was a really interesting, characteristic, to have someone, who, and I mean, it makes sense that you would have Iranian Americans who, I've even heard stories of some, Middle Eastern Americans going into the CIA to work because
Right.
although they're Middle Eastern descent, they feel that their loyalties are to the U.S. So I definitely think that definitely adds a layer to all this. So
Yeah,
that's interesting
absolutely.
to
And
explore.
it was, for me, I wanted to make sure that there was a personal story involved, so that the reader could be personally invested in why Kirk was going over there to do the things that he did. Because if he's going to be the eyes and the ears for the reader inside Iran, then he's got to be likable, and people have to understand why it is he feels he's doing what he feels that he has to do. So. He'll always be, a character that I love. But as the series progressed, he played a little bit smaller role because once I established what was going on in Iran, I wanted to go with a more senior CIA operative, and I introduced the character of Ben Thrasher in Surviving the Lion's Den, but he then takes over as the main protagonist in the second novel in the series, the Iranian Deception, and then
Yeah,
the final novel, the Ayatollah Takedown. So to me, it was more about establishing, what we're doing inside Iran, and that now that we have that, we need a stronger, I won't say Mitch Rapp like, but it's certainly a character that has a strong personality that is a senior CIA operative. And that
yeah.
character was so much fun to write.
Well, that's the thing too. Like about because I've written a couple of books myself. Albeit they're shorter novellas. But the one thing I've certainly noticed is, I've got my main guy, John Ryder, who, I created way back before I, put pen to paper. I had him as, kind of a concept. So writing his, bringing him to life, that was fun. But yes, I've definitely created other characters since kind of starting the universe that have taken on
Right.
other roles as well. I think one of the things that is always fun as a writer, at least for me personally, is like I have notes for John Ryder that are maybe only a page, long, very,
Mm-hmm.
minuscule details. I didn't have a whole lot mapped out, and now for him and other characters, like I have insane details, like even what type of coffee, they like to drink,
Oh
stuff
yeah,
that
yeah.
you know you don't really think about until you actually start writing the character.
Yeah, and that's part of the organic creative process, but it also means that, it goes into the heart of character development. You're not gonna,
Yeah,
when you write your first novel with your protagonist, you're just scratching the surface.
yeah.
So as you write them more and more, you start, discovering things about them that, you didn't realize at the get-go. And you're not expected, no matter what, anybody thinks, you're not expected to know everything about your character when you write, he or she for the first time. It doesn't work like that. You have to know your character inside and out, but that doesn't mean, absolutely, everything about them. It doesn't, whether it be, how they take their coffee, or, how often or how short they like their fingernails clipped, or things like that. That's why, it's good to have, a character, go through at least 3 to 5 books in a series to me, because that character is always evolving. Now, it's not to say that there's anything wrong about, a one-off book, with a character, not at all. But if you end up enjoying the character, writing it, then I think it's good for a series, because you can kind of play around with them as much as possible, and get to know them better.
Yeah, absolutely. And then regarding, like, do you have a writing process, or are you more or less a pantser like I am?
I'm a little bit of a hybrid. When I start out writing, I have a good idea of, how it's going to start and where I want it to go. So I'll outline, the chapters, and it'll be as simple as, chapter 14, will be as simple as,
Yeah,
Sam goes to the grocery store. But I'm not going to, I just have to point myself in the right direction, because I don't like outlining too much, because to me, it's a good way to box yourself in. So I'll usually outline, 2/3 of the book, and then at that point, panic sets in. It's like, oh my God, how this is only 2/3. How am I going to get there? But as you start writing, you fill in the blanks a little bit more, and you get all the chapters you want.
yeah,
So I would say I'm a little bit more on the pantser side, but I have to give myself a little bit of direction.
that's fair. I think, like, for my first one, I used to have the, bad habit of, I would try and, like, meticulously outline everything, but then I would get obsessed with,
Yeah,
with actually, like, writing the outline and perfecting that rather than writing.
right. Yeah, yeah. I like, to me, it's, you put your butt in the seat, and let the the brain connect to the fingers, and you just let loose.
Yeah,
That is it's the most organic piece of the process to me. And because if I tend to think, this is, nothing against anybody who is a big outliner, but for me, if I was that way, it would I would be very lazy about actually trying to, write the book, because at that point, okay, well, I've got the outline ready, all I have to do is, actually put it into, 1,000 words, and it just wouldn't work for me, and I
yeah,
can't do it like that. I can't do it like that.
yeah. No, I definitely, like, for me personally, what's been helpful for me actually is I don't really use it. I don't really use it as much as, like, a writing tool, but I've definitely used ChatGPT, where I put, like, bullet points of some ideas, and then I've let it kind of create, like, an outline, just to kind of, like, organize and let me see the roadmap, and that's definitely been helpful. And I think, there are good uses for that. And also, like, for things like, research, it's definitely been good to be able to, like, ask questions as opposed to, Googling things and then, um,
Right.
finding. So, well, now that's another question though too, is in regards to, like, researching Afghanistan and or researching Iran, did you just do online research, or did you talk to people, or how did that
Yeah.
go about?
Yeah, it was a number of different things. I was fortunate that, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and there's not a large, Iranian community, but there is some. And sometimes, they would have, protests uptown, and I would get the chance
Yeah,
to go up and talk to them. What was it like over there? What are your feelings on this and that? I did do a lot of, I read some, nonfiction novels that helped me out. But as much as the Iranian government takes a hard line to Facebook and Twitter, they're surprisingly lenient on, YouTube and Instagram. So I was able to, if I wanted to see, what one of the palaces looked like, everybody has a camera phone or a dash cam these days. So so it enabled me to see what it looked like on the inside. And, one of the things that was, the most interesting to me is, what does their interstate system look like? Is it, a lot like ours? Is it broken down? Is it their, do they, I mean, I don't want to say using, ox carts or anything like that, but these are the details that you need to be able to, speak to in order to give your, the location some legitimacy.
Yeah.
So the online stuff really helped. There was one, and I can't remember the name of it, but there was one really good documentary on Amazon Prime, about the inner workings of Iran, and how people who were living under the Ayatollah's fist, managed to live below the radar in terms of, the black market economy and things like that. So it wasn't one thing that I did. I did multiple things, and I just hope that, I did it justice. And I feel like I did, but, as much as I wanted to go over there and see it for myself, my wife was not willing to pay the ransom.
Yeah, no, I think that, well, that's the whole thing is like, I know that like a lot of, I know that Vince, Flynn went over to the Middle East, multiple times to do,
Sure, sure.
research. And I mean, that's one thing too, is, like, that's crazy in and of itself. Then like, for just like indie, authors like, yourself and myself, like, I, I, I would never want to be I would never want to be over there, to begin with, just with all the turmoil, although, that is a beautiful part of the world. But, so it's always interesting to find out, like, well, how do, you know, non-bigwig authors do research and whatnot, because I think
Yeah.
sometimes that can be just as fascinating as, the authors who are able to, go to the places that they write about.
Yeah, yeah. First, you can't ever beat firsthand experience, but if you're not able to, you have to make sure that you do your research, because you're going to get called out on it if you're wrong.
Yeah. So, yeah, for sure. Well, do you have any more books planned out in the series so far, or other projects at this
No,
point?
no, the Surviving the Lion's Den series, at least for the time being, is put to bed. It was kind of a sad goodbye, when I finished the Ayatollah Takedown, because I can kind of still see the characters in the corner staring at me from time to time, itching, poking me to do more with them. And I think I left it open-ended enough that if I ever wanted to revisit the series, I think I could. But my contract with that publisher was for 3 novels, and I fulfilled my contracts. I do have a new novel in the works. I can't say, too much about it, because I'm still, writing the first draft. I'm probably about, if I had to guess, probably about halfway through it. But it does involve new characters. It does not have an international setting. It does have a domestic setting, but I'm really excited about it. I think, if I'm fortunate enough to get a new agent and a new publisher, I think people are going to really like, the characters that I've come up with. But for now, the Lion's Den lives in infamy, so to speak, for people to, it's I guess, my stamp on the world for right now. But, hopefully, writers, once we start, we can't stop. So,
Yeah.
I never intended those three to just be my swan song. I want to try and, you know, build another series, and that will hopefully, help me reach the heights that I'm looking for as an author. And you can't do that unless you're writing. So, we'll see what happens. I don't know how much longer it's going to take. There's still, after the first draft, and there's, the editing process that I have to do on my own. Then there's an editing process that'll, I'll hire somebody to help me with. And then, if I'm fortunate enough to get an agent and a publisher, you never know. I may end up having to rewrite, a quarter of the book to so that it is, has more, we'll call it more conducive, so it's more conducive to, what the market is looking for at the time. And that's a difficult thing to do, in advance. But that's the process these days if you want to get a major publishing contract.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I actually I hadn't realized at first because I've been on your site, but I wasn't sure at first that so you went with a publisher initially for your first 3 books.
Correct.
And
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of a funny story because, I had only, when I sold, Lion's Den, I didn't know what was going to happen. And, the publisher at the time says, this is really good, but I don't want one, I want three, I want a series. I'm on the phone with my agent, at the time and saying, listen, I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, okay, this is good. But, she was like, okay, so what other ideas do you have? And I had only mildly thought about, what I was going to do if I was going to turn it into a series. I just, I didn't have anything else, in the tank other than those ideas. So that's what I gave her at the
yeah,
time, and and that's what the publisher said. Okay, we can do business.
yeah, I think that's I think that's pretty cool. Like I know authors who have been successful in traditional publishing, but then I also know authors who were in traditional publishing, but are now indie press, and they've had success there.
Sure, sure.
So I think it's, and I don't think, I think now there's more acceptance for the self-published indie press, compared to what there was even like 5 years ago when
Yeah.
I first started, looking at like writing in public.
Hmm.
In pub-
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I have a couple of good friends that I've met through, social media and going to writers' conferences that, write, or publish independently. And there's nothing wrong with that. To me, my skills, are really I think, are with writing the book. And if you really want to make a lot of money, in publishing independently, there's another skill set that's required to successfully market the book, so you can make sure that you get the money that you feel like you deserve.
right.
I'm not bad at marketing, but I don't excel at it. So for me, going the traditional route is just what I want. But I have some good friends. John Stamp is one that he publishes independently, and he does really well. So it just kind of depends on what road you want to take. I will say the one thing that has happened with self-publishing, as good as it's been, because back in, like, these 90s, even early 2000s, self-publishing was, that was the road last taken, and it wasn't being
Right.
taken very seriously because it was viewed as, well, you couldn't get a publisher, so you're gonna publish on your own. It's very much changed, now. And I think, especially in the romance genre, romance novels independently, they do very, very well independently on
Yeah.
Amazon and things like that. Action, for whatever reason, it's still a tough nut to crack, but either way, there's been so much independent publishing, in Kindle Direct and things like that. It's saturated the market a little bit, and it's made it harder to, for as good as it's been able to help some authors break out, it's been harder for other authors to really make it to where they want, because now there's so many more books out in the industry, and you really have to struggle to, to find your audience. But that's just the world we live in now. So I mean, there's pros and cons to it, whether it be, how you want to publish it, or pros and cons to, the way the market handles it. But in the end, it's all up to you, the writer, to you know do what you have to do to make yourself a success.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you're familiar with Eric P. Bishop, but he's a very close friend of
Yeah.
mine in the
Yep. Yep.
author
Eric and I know
circle.
know each other well. Yeah, we ran it. I actually ran into him. We met for drinks one day here in Charlotte, and then we met I didn't know he was attending, but Brad Meltzer was doing a book signing up in Winston-Salem. We ended up running into each other. So yeah, Eric and I know each other.
Yeah. Well, you two are fairly in the same. You two are closer to each other. So
Right, yeah, yeah.
I'm in Florida, so so I'm not like too far from you. I'm
Hmm.
kind of in the same region, but not really. I'm one of those
Right.
weird.
So,
Yeah, I'm one of those weird Florida guys. But yeah, I've had him on the podcast a couple of times, and the first time I had him on, he had just published the Bodman through through the traditional publisher. And then the second time I had him on, he was publishing Breach of Trust, but he was doing it through his own imprint.
right.
And I thought that the thing that was wild to me was they liked the Bodman and they wanted another book, but then when he gave them Breach of Trust, the publisher didn't like it, but like a lot of their authors, even in the traditionally published space, liked it. So I thought that
Yeah,
was
yeah,
very interesting.
yeah. There's a story for him to tell on that. I know what it is, but I don't want to tell his story. But yeah, he definitely. I think he made the right decision, and it was not. It wasn't an easy one. It was not an easy one for me to decide that I didn't want to renew my contract with the publisher that allowed me to publish the Lion's Den series. Um, you know, Publishing it's a tough industry. People don't realize how tough it is. Some people
Yeah,
think that you write a book, you get a publisher, they give you a good advance, you get a movie deal within a year, and then you're set for life. It does not work like that. I mean, I'm
no,
not saying it doesn't happen, but because some people have lucked out like that. I think Jack Carr has done very well. He has a brand that is, I think, unbeatable right now. And then when Baldacci, published Absolute Power, he was fortunate like that. And I think T.J. Newman, who has what was it? Worst Case Scenario. She wrote Worst Case Scenario. I think she's done really well. So it happens, but it's more the exception uh, than the rules. When you get out there, a lot of times, you just have to put your name out there, socialize and market as best you can, and get your feet wet, and then determine the next steps. Depending on how those next steps go will
yeah,
depend on whether or not you want to keep doing it. Uh, but you have to be very committed to your creative process, and be passionate about you know whether or not you want to keep doing it. And I want to apologize for the noise in here. I have my two dogs that like to chat back and forth, so apologies for the noise in the background.
no problem. We're big fans of dogs and other pets here on the Whitfield Report. Yeah,
Good.
well, I mean that that's the other thing too is it really does depend on who all you know, and I think one of the things that a lot of people miss with Jack Carr, and this isn't a knock against him by any means, but even when Jack was on Joe Rogan the first time, I distinctly remember him saying that one of the reasons why he was able to get the Terminal List greenlit was because he knew a guy from the SEAL teams who had already been working in Hollywood for a few years and had contacts. So he was
Yep. Yeah.
he was able to use that to his advantage, and props to him for using that connection.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, you use whatever connections you have. There's
Yeah,
no knock whatsoever. In the end, that that helped him get a foot in. But in the end, the terminal list is what, to his credit, is what helped propel him.
yeah,
And I think that it is set him apart. his brand, I don't know how he does it. Everybody, every author that I know, include myself included, wants to be able to market themselves and brand themselves the way Jack Carr does. And unfortunately for the rest of us, there's only one Jack Carr. So everybody handles it differently, but I think he's unbeatable in that respect. But when it comes to making it big, even guys like I saw Scott Turow on a podcast recently, and he hit it big with Presumed Innocent, but it took him 20 years to get there. When Flynn was selling, Flynn's self-published Term Limits, he was selling it, out of the back of his car, and I think John Grisham did the same thing when he wrote A Time to Kill before, he was able to get it big. So, there's always these obstacles that, unfortunately, everyone, no matter what business you're in, has to overcome. But if you're in the creative, genre, whether it be, music or books or whatever, somehow, some way, there's always some dues that have to be paid. But as long as you remain committed to your process and to your writing, hopefully it'll come true. I'm still waiting for my ticket to get cashed, so I have to believe in myself that it'll happen one day.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, same thing with like podcasting. I've been doing podcasting since I was, a teenager in 2008, back before anyone, knew what podcasting even was, for the most part. And I have friends who, you know, they they start a podcast and like 3 episodes into it, 3 weeks into it, a month. They're like, well, how come I'm not getting, thousands of downloads and listeners? And I want to be the next Joe Rogan. And, I
Who
always have,
doesn't?
yeah. And I have to tell people, well, like, yeah, who does? I mean, I've been doing this for, close to 17 years, and,
Hmm.
I'm still growing. And, yeah, with anything, it's also persistence and, patience. And also, I mean, things change. Like,
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. It's just there's a journey for all of us, and everybody's journey is different. But you stay committed, you'll get to where you need to be, eventually.
absolutely. Well, Matt, I really appreciate your time. I know that you said you've got other projects that, you're working on, and, I know that you're kind of keeping those close to the best, and I can appreciate that as someone who's kind of in that same boat. But, I'd love to have you back on and, to chat about chat about that, when the time comes for that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
One thing, I guess, in regards to that, without going into specific details, do you have a I guess a different attitude about writing what you're working on right now as opposed to the trilogy you just finished? Are you approaching things differently? Or I know
No, that's an
that's kind of a weird question to ask, but
no, it's not weird. It's I've never had that question before. That's an interesting one. I don't think my attitude has changed towards writing. I think my attitude has changed towards the publishing industry because now I know, I have a better understanding of how hard it is to make it big.
yeah,
When I first went in, I was really naive. I wasn't as naive as to think as, I'm going to get a movie deal and, within 6 months and, retire, at 45 or whatever. But I have a better understanding about, the industry and, the people in it and things like that. And I've had a lot of good come out of it, meeting different writers at, BoucherCon and things like that. But the writing process to me is I still think that I have the same attitude I did before. And the only thing that's really changed now is, after I had Lion's Den behind me, I knew the characters pretty well. So it was all about plot, and what I wanted to put them through next. Now that I'm starting a new series, I'm basically starting over. So
yeah,
I have to reacquaint myself with, the creative process of getting to know the characters and, weaving the plot the way that I want. And it's about, getting my butt in that seat and making sure that, I write, as consistently as possible.
Yeah, I guess kind of another way of, asking that question is, did you always intend your, Lion's Den, I guess, trilogy to be a trilogy, or was it one of those things where, like, had the publisher said, "Hey, we want 5 or 7 books." Do you think that would have, sure, were you always set to write, just a set number of books?
At the time, I was so happy that I'd gotten a publishing. I had a publisher that was interested. 3 sounded like, a very achievable goal.
Sure.
So I think you want to start small and then kind of go from there. You get a 5-book deal or a 7-book deal right out of the gate I would consider that to be very, very rare. I don't know how much that happens, but
Yeah.
I certainly haven't heard of it. But it ended up being very good for me that it ended up being a series because, once I had Lion's Den behind me, the words flowed pretty freely and pretty well. And I actually couldn't wait to write the next chapter because I was excited about where I was going. And that's not to say that's not happening with this one. It's just a little bit of a slower process because there are things that, maybe I think I'm on chapter 27 right now in the new book. And, every time I come up with something, I have to make sure that I tie it back to something I did in maybe chapter 11
Yeah.
or something like that. So, so I think when you start out with, your first novel, the process is always going to be a little bit slower than it is when you're writing books 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or whatever it is, because you've got a lot of ground. You have a lot of foundation that you have to lay.
Sure, sure. The reason I kind of asked that question though is, and I definitely think that your explanation of you wanting to keep it as a trilogy is smart. But I know several people in the indie author space where they they started out with the intention of writing 1 book, and then they started
Mhm.
and then they got to 2 and 3 because of the success. And now, I mean, nothing against them, but as writers, but it kind of seems, at least for some of them, that you can tell that, okay, maybe this series should have ended at book 3 or book 4, because now it's kind of going off the rails a little bit. So I
It
think
it is easy to get stale. Yeah, it's easy to get stale when you do that, but there's always ways to do it right. I think Brad Thor is on. Oh, I think he's on. Oh my gosh, Scott Harvith number 25 or 26 or something like that. He's in the 20s,
yeah,
but he always finds a way to let his character adapt and change as he's writing that. So if you're going to commit to writing a series, then you have to commit to knowing that the character is going to change and he or she is going to go through encountered a lot of different aspects of life. So you can't keep the character the same. That you can't do that. That's your character will get stale, and the readers will get bored of it. And quite honestly, I think you'll probably get tired of it. So you have to be able to you have to be willing to evolve the character if you're going to stay in a series.
yeah. I mean, I definitely think that's a good point too, and it's also very subjective to the reader. I haven't read like a Brad Thor book in a couple of years, and it's not because I've lost interest. It's just because there's so much out there now, and you don't have time to
Sure,
read everything.
sure,
I
sure.
do know that like there are some people I know who are like, well, I feel like Brad should have wrapped up the Harbath series after book 17, or something like that. I'm just throwing out a number, or I've heard stuff like that, and then I hear other people being like, yeah, no, the Harbath series is still going great. So I mean, I suppose
Sure.
it's all
Yeah,
up to the reader. So
it is. Yeah, it is. And I mean, and Harvath is still selling. I don't think there's any reason to stop the train. I read, every new one that he comes out with, and I see that character, constantly changing. As long as the character stays hot, and to me, in my opinion, he still is, then there's no reason to stop it. But if you get to the point where, as a writer, you feel like you've done all that you can do with the character, then it's time to move on.
yeah, as long as he enjoys writing, and as long as you as a reader still enjoy reading, I have no problem with those series continuing on. So
Yeah, absolutely.
but anyway, well, Matt, I really appreciate you coming on, sir, and chatting with me. And like I said, you're welcome back anytime. Where can people find you and online?
Oh, I appreciate you having me on, Sam. It's been a real honor. So thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, people can go to my website, mattscottbooks.com, where you'll get trailers for all 3 of the books in the Surviving the Lion's Den series, as well as the first chapter of each book, so to give you a little bit of a preview. On social media, for Instagram and Twitter, I am at Matt Scott Books. For Facebook, I just have a personal account. I mean, I do have a business account, but my personal account is the better way to reach me. So, if you want a signed copy, message me and we'll work something out. But I answer every DM or tag that I receive. So I'll be glad to hear from everybody, and I hope that they'll pick it up and enjoy the series. And if you do, definitely leave a review on Amazon, because that's the way writers move up in the rankings when a query is performed on Amazon.
Yeah, and I bought. I know that you sent me an arc, but I did buy all 3 books.
Thank you.
Because after reading the first few pages, I was like, all right, this guy has me sold. And I think that that's another thing too, is selling your opening. That's really what gets the reader's attention.
I agree. Yeah.
And then also, just from one author to another, props for having a really clean, author website too. So
Thank you.
I'll definitely link that, and link all the other pertinent information to the episode show notes, and hopefully we can get some more eyes on your work. I definitely encourage everyone to go check out Matt's books. So anyway, thanks to everyone
Thanks,
who
Sam. I appreciate it.
tuned in, and we'll see you for the Wednesday live show. Thanks, everyone.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.